Acob here, and this is a guide on how to get the Proven Healer title and achievement for the Restoration Shaman Level 100 edition. I'm making this guide because I'm not really happy with the current guides out there. They either just tell you what glyphs and talents to use without any discussion, or they just show 30 minutes of gameplay without explaining what they're actually doing. The gear I use is mostly 630 item level heroic dungeon drops. While doing heroics for Valor, you may want to collect this set as Proving Grounds gets easier with a lower item level. Now, I do have the legendary ring, but I've gotten past the 60th wave without it. Spirit and Mastery are the two stats you want to focus on the most, but for getting the Proven Healer title and achievement, it's really not that important. For Tier 15 talents, I chose Astral Shift. Astral Shift is mostly useful for Wave 4, but could also be used in Waves 6 and 9. Nature's Guardian is an easier alternative, but not as useful in my opinion as having an on-demand damage reduction ability. As for Stone Bulwark Totem, it's just too underpowered to be used. Now, some people may argue that the shield it provides can actually prevent the bleed debuff from being applied to you in the first place. However, if you position yourself correctly, you can minimize or even eliminate that from happening, as I'll discuss later on in my video. For Tier 30, none of those options really have any effect on the Proving Grounds. For Tier 45, Totemic Projection is vital for placing Capacitor and Spirit Link totems and is what I chose. Now, Call of the Elements can give you extra Capacitor totem stuns and extra Healing Stream totems. The last option here is Totemic Persistence, and that allows you to have Healing Tide totem up with a Healing Stream totem at the same time. Now, both of these last two talents aren't strong enough to replace the utility granted by Totemic Projection and the freedom it grants you to position yourself correctly. For Tier 60, I went with Echo of the Elements. The strongest part of this talent is the flexibility you get with Riptide to assure a high uptime on your tidal waves buff. You also get an extra use out of Spirit Link Totem. For my personal best score, I actually use Ancestral Swiftness. Ancestral Swiftness is good for the small haste buff and the ability to have an instant healing wave or healing surge. Ancestral Swiftness is off the GCD and can be macroed with either of those two spells. Elemental Mastery is like a mini Bloodlust or Heroism with a 2-minute cooldown. This tier offers the most choice, and I like to experiment a little bit more with all the options there. For Tier 75, I chose Rushing Streams for an empowered Healing Stream totem. Conductivity really isn't that good, as I never actually cast Healing Rain during the middle of a wave. Ancestral Guidance is very weak and lacks the consistency that Rushing Streams provides. For Tier 90, I went with Elemental Blast. The mana gain from Elemental Blast is just too powerful to bypass. I use a macro that allows me to keep a friendly target and cast this on an enemy. An easier alternative would be Unleash Fury, although it would sacrifice a lot of mana regen by not having Elemental Blast. Primal Elementalist is not good for the same reason, and you're restricted on when to use them if you want 4 uses every 10 waves. For Tier 100, the best option here is Cloud Burst Totem. If you learn to time this spell, you could get a lot of burst healing from it at just the right moment. High Tide is useless as you shouldn't be casting Chain Heal. Storm Elemental Totem would only heal targets in a 15-yard radius. Even if you position this correctly, you only get to use this maybe 2 out of every 10 waves, whereas Cloud Burst can be used every single wave. For glyphs, I use Healing Stream Totem, Healing Wave, and Cleansing Waters. Glyph of Totemic Recall may be more trouble than it's worth, and Glyph of Purify Spirit seems to cause more issues with its longer cooldown than it's supposed to prevent. For the opener, I drop a Capacitor Totem for 3 or 4 seconds before the wave begins. This buys you enough time to cast a Flame Shock for a bit of free damage, Elemental Blast for the Spirit and Stats buff it grants, Cloudburst Totem if it's available, Riptide to give you 2 stacks of the Tidal Waves buff, Unleash Life to buff your next spell, and by this time the tank will probably be ready for a buffed and mana efficient healing wave. Positioning is very important. In general, you want to stand in melee range. However, totemic projection gives you a lot more leeway with this. For some waves, you want to be far away from certain mobs that apply a bleed debuff that's only removed when fully healed. In general, you take more damage from abilities than party members do. Also, it's easier to heal them up as they have about half the HP that you have. Earth Shield should be kept on the tank as often as you can. The 20% bonus healing is great as the tank takes the most damage. Refresh it in between waves. Now, Unleash Life during moments of low damage when you can sneak one in. Same goes for Elemental Blast. However, Elemental Blast has a much higher priority and should be cast on cooldown if possible. Tidal Wave's buff appears as 2 charges when you cast a Riptide or Chain Heal, although Chain Heal shouldn't be cast at all. Now, Tidal Waves allows you to cast your efficient healing wave spell a little faster, or increase the crit chance of Healing Surge by 30%. You should be tracking this buff and trying to keep 100% uptime on it. Great timing on Cloud Burst Totem can result in great timely bursts. And Earth Elemental Totem is not really worth casting. It does no damage and targets are taunt immune, as you'll see in my video. Set and socket bonuses are disabled. You can use food and flask buffs, but they really aren't needed. If you really want to, you can use a flask and a mastery granting food. Now, try to use lower item level gear. I recommend getting cheap mastery enchants for your rings, back, and neck. I recommend Mark of the Shadow Moon enchant for your weapon for the boneless spirit it provides. The last thing here is to practice this often and don't be discouraged. Try to set up mouse over macros for quicker healing. Be willing to make changes to your UI or get add-ons to track your spells a little bit better. Be willing to make changes. Don't be stubborn. That's the difference between good players and not so good players. Wave 1 is the same as Wave 11, 21, and so on. Just like Waves 6, 16, and 26 are the same. While Waves 1 through 10 are unique to each other, they are just repeated over and over again endlessly. The difference is the amount of damage steadily ramps up. Now for Wave 1, perform the opener as I mentioned before, as this allows you to easily cast your Elemental Blast and get a bit of damage with Flame Shock and start off with efficient healing. The tank takes the majority of damage and should be your main focus, but sometimes the spell gets off and damages your other party members. To counter this, you can drop a grounding totem. Also, as long as everyone's above 50%, you should be okay here. By positioning myself correctly, my grounding totem covered my whole team. The mob wasn't able to get a cast off in my video, but I would have been prepared if he did. Even at higher levels, this is considered to be a pretty easy wave. There will be opportunities to DPS here, so don't just stand there doing nothing. You only need one Cloud Burst Totem and no major cooldown should be required.
No, I can't cast that yet. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. No, I can't cast that yet. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. That's still recharging.
Wave 2 is the first difficult wave you will encounter. Before your opener, summon your Fire Elemental Totem to help end this wave as early as possible. You need to use Descendants shortly after your opener or won't be up in time for Wave 5. I use Spirit Link Totem fairly early to help with the tank damage. Use Cloudburst Totem a second time this wave as it won't be that useful for the next wave. Remember, dispel what you need to.
Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. No, I can't cast that yet. It's not ready yet. That's still recharging. I can't use that item.
For Wave 3, use a Healing Stream totem instead of a Cloudburst totem early on. Wave 3 introduces mobs that apply a bleed debuff on your party. The two worst targets for this are you and the tank. Positioning yourself far back from the group decreases your chances of getting the debuff. Just stay in range of the tank. If you do get the debuff, Healing Surge and use your health stone to remove it as quickly as possible. If the tank gets it, Healing Surge him as much as necessary to remove it as fast as possible. The other members of your party get the debuff is what you actually prefer, because their lower HP makes it easier to remove it. Riptide and Unleashed Life are sometimes enough to actually remove it from them. No cooldowns are needed this wave, and it ends a little bit early. In my video, I had enough confidence to not use Healing Surge on the tank, although this can be risky, especially at higher levels. The positioning of my Healing Stream totem was bad, and I don't think it even reached the tank. Dropping the Earth Elemental totem is a complete waste, as it does almost 0 damage, and mobs are taunt immune, as you can see in this video. Wave 4 introduces more debuffs than you can dispel. Don't dispel too quickly. You need to wait for the second debuff to land, because sometimes they land on the same target, and also there's a priority to your dispelling. The priority to dispel from highest to lowest is the tank, the rogue, the mage, you with Astral Shift on cooldown, the hunter, and then you with Astral Shift available. The tank and the rogue are the two worst targets to get the debuff, because if it goes off, it's guaranteed to do damage to multiple party members. With the mage, it depends on where she's standing. You should always stand away from the group. In my video, I had to take a couple steps that I shouldn't have had to if I was in the correct position. Now, whether to use the second Cloud Burst or save it is debatable, as it's useful to have earlier on in the next wave. Now, I used my extra Spirit Link totem in the video, but if you didn't take Echo of the Elements, you don't have to worry about that. And yes, the second and third debuff were on the two worst possible targets, the tank and the rogue, and even though that happened, I was able to deal with that situation there.
That's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet. That's still recharging. It's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet. That spell isn't ready yet. I can't use that item.
I am a wall of iron, but I cannot hold much longer.
No, I can't cast that yet.
Wave 5 is designed to catch new players off guard and quickly end your run. You need to position yourself similarly to how I did in my video to ensure you don't get the bleed debuff from the mob that doesn't appear right away. Drop your Healing Tide totem as soon as your group takes the area of effect damage. Then pop your Ascendants and keep your focus mostly on the tank. At about 16 seconds in, one of the mobs will enrage and deal massive damage to the tank. Don't be afraid to spam Healing Surge on the tank. One of your party members will get the bleed debuff placed on them. A Riptide should suffice in stabilizing them, as you should really keep your concentration on the tank the entire time if possible. Once the rage ends, the encounter becomes a lot more manageable. One more bleed debuff is applied to a raid member, but at this point it should be easy to remove. Use the end of this wave as a time to DPS, as the mobs may not die before the next wave begins. Also, save your Cloudburst totem for the last 5 to 10 seconds of the wave, as its effect is very useful for the next wave, as I'll explain later.
That's still recharging. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. It's still recharging. It's not ready yet. That's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet. I can't use that item yet. It's still recharging. I can't use that item yet. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. No, I can't cast that yet. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. That's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet.
Wave 6 will have a mob applying the bleed debuff shortly after it begins. You can position yourself away to avoid this. You can drop your healing stream totem to trigger your cloud burst totem from late last wave to help quickly remove the debuff. Now if the debuff lands on the tank, it becomes a little bit more difficult to remove it. If one of the bleed debuffs do land on you, you can cast Astral Shift and possibly use the Health Stone if you didn't use it on wave 3 to quickly remove it. Now in my video I actually didn't do these two things, and that made it a lot more hectic for me. Another thing to keep in mind is you have to dispel the dispellable debuff. It's really not that complicated. No major cooldowns are needed here, and this wave will end early.
It's not ready yet. Hey, that's too far away. Nah, that spell isn't ready yet. It's not recharging. I can't do that item yet. It's not ready yet. That's still recharging. I
I am
can't
a
use
wall
that
of
item
iron,
yet.
but I cannot hold much longer.
Before wave 7 begins, bring on your fire elemental totem for extra damage. 2 mobs will enrage about 14 seconds into the wave. This gives you enough time to do your standard opener and to place a Spirit Link totem. Now focus on the tank, as their area of effect damage is not dangerous, but the tank damage certainly is. In my video I let the tank dip quite a bit lower than I should have. Once the enrage ends, the rest of the wave is simple and you don't need to cast your second Cloudburst totem.
It's still recharged. It's not ready yet. I can't use that item yet. It's still recharged. It's not ready yet. That's still recharging.
For wave 8, after your standard opener, place a grounding totem in a spot where it will cover as many party members as possible. Spot heal and try to keep everyone above 50%. Grounding totem a second time as soon as it comes off a cooldown. It may be wise to try to interrupt, but it really isn't necessary here. Save the second Cloudburst totem and get into position for the next wave. No major cooldowns are needed here. For wave 9, cast capacitor totem no later than 4 seconds before the wave begins. It's important to get the stun off before the mob can finish his cast. Once the mob recovers from the stun, interrupt his first cast, immediately cast Ascendance, and quickly remove the bleed debuff. The mob will get a cast off, which will deal a lot of damage to your party. Trigger your Cloudburst Totem to quickly heal your group. Now, I triggered Cloudburst Totem by casting Healing Tide Totem. However, it seems like casting Healing Stream Totem might have been the better option, as Healing Tide Totem didn't really heal for anything. Should be able to interrupt the next cast. Between all of this, you have to dispel a debuff periodically. This is one of the more difficult waves to master, as there's a lot to manage here. The second Cloudburst Totem isn't necessary. Using Astral Shift isn't a bad idea to use before you take the area of effect damage, but it's difficult to actually use as so much is going on here. Wave 10 is an easy wave. You may be tempted to use a Spirit Link Totem on the tank when the mob enrages, but it's not necessary. You need to dispel the debuff, and I wouldn't even worry about damage to non-tanks. One last thing to note is how much mana I actually end the wave with. Keep in mind I don't have any food buffs or a flask, and my enchants are just pretty much the cheap ones, so this is very much doable. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, and just understanding what you're doing.
That's still recharging. Ready yet. I can't use that item. That's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet. That's still recharging. No, I can't cast that yet. All right. Whoa!
After doing all this, it's pretty obvious that Wave 5 is the most difficult wave. And it's the reason why I chose to use my cooldowns the way I use them, just basically to be able to get past Wave 5. Some things I could do to improve are to interrupt more, especially on Waves 8 and possibly a few others. I usually don't worry about it too much. It seems to be more of a distraction for me, but it could possibly be something to help me out, and it might actually work better. Another thing would be the tank shield wall. Most people try to keep the tank at high health so that his shield wall is available for Wave 5. Now, another idea would be to let him get low and purposely trigger it toward the end of Wave 2. That way it'll be available to be used for Wave 5. It does have about a 2-minute cooldown on it from what I've read on the internet. Another idea would be to use Bloodlust earlier. Now, it's always used on Wave 10, but you could use it on wave 5, for example, to see if you could get more benefit out of it. Then something I like to experiment with a little bit more in the future. I like to use capacitor totem at the beginning of a wave. However, there might be better times to actually use it, and because it's on a 45-second cooldown, some of the longer waves you could actually use it twice on, so that's something that could be experimented with. Healing Rain is a spell I really don't use at all. Maybe there is some use for it, possibly at the beginning of a wave, but I haven't really played around with that too much. It's very expensive and doesn't do a ton of healing, especially if there's only 3 members in melee range. Another thing I like to talk about is the super min-maxing of gear. Now, in order to get your level 30, your wave 30 achievement, you really don't need to go too crazy with this, but if you're interested, I will post an article in the description. It's by a restoration druid, and he goes over the item levels that are most beneficial, and you could take a look at it there. And if there's any other things that you think I missed or different ideas I didn't go over, post them in the comments section and I'll try to respond to all of them there. Right now I do plan on doing an updated guide for Legion, as well as covering possibly all the other healers as well. So far, Legion is in alpha and everything is subject to change, but it looks like they are removing things like Fire Elemental Totem, Earth Shield, Unleash Your Life, Grounding Totem, even Totemic Recall. Don't really, I'm not too happy about them removing things, but we'll see how that plays out. Totems now automatically have Totemic Projection built in, so you should be able to drop them where you want to drop them. Riptide and Chain Heal only generate 1 tidal wave baseline now. As on live right now they generate 2, but there is a talent that allows them to generate 2 again. I'm not sure how I feel about all that. Either that talent's going to be mandatory or just really going to feel slow to play the class as it is looking right now. Shamanistic Rage is our baseline damage reduction ability, so we don't need Astral Shift anymore. If you want Capacitor Totem and Ascendance, you have to talent into them, which is, again, 2 more talents that we can't choose something else with. Okay, and I hope you guys found this guide to be helpful, and thank you for watching.